Thanks, Kate. As you said earlier, I qualified in 2007 from Bristol University and worked for about 7 years in a farm-only practice in the southwest of England and South Wales. And then after that, I worked for about 3 years at the University of Nottingham doing a residency in dairy herd health and production. Then for a couple of years after that for Evidence Group, focusing on milk quality and nutrition. And for the last 4 months, I've worked for Lambert, Leonard and May in Derbyshire. So I'm back in practice at Coalface. So that's my introduction. And tonight we're going to look at Thermodurics. And I've got some objectives for tonight, and they're really to give you an introduction. I'll look at what Thermodurics are. We'll touch on back-to-scan and Thermodurics, because many of you are confused why we're looking at Thermodurics when we were already looking at back-to-scan as a measure of milk quality. We'll touch on whether Thermodurics have actually been used before, why they might be important in the processing chain, and also to you. Where do they come from, and how we might go about managing them if we had a problem on farm. So just looking at what are they. So Thermodurics, very simply, are heat-resistant bacteria, and they have ability to survive pasteurisation. So pasteurisation, typically in food processing, uses a temperature of around 75 degrees for about 15 seconds. But many of you may be familiar with using small batch pasteurizers on farm, which typically run about 63 degrees for 30 minutes. So these bacteria, these Thermoduric bacteria, can survive these high temperatures, which are used to remove bacteria from milk and make it safe for consumers. And therefore, because they survive pasteurization, they're in the product afterwards on the shelf in the supermarket, and they have the potential to cause shelf life issues, quality issues, and potentially food poisoning issues. So really, I like to think of Thermodurics as an umbrella term. So it encompasses a range of different bacterial types which have different abilities in terms of growth in different environments. But I think the main one we need to worry about, or the main grouping we need to worry about, are these psychotrophic bacteria. So apologies for the big word, but that simply means bacteria that are both thermoduric and can survive the temperature of pasteurization, but can also grow at temperatures less than 7 degrees. So they have the ability to multiply in refrigerated dairy products and therefore cause these shelf life issues that I've talked about already. So Thermodurics are felt to give a good indication of the level of milking equipment sanitation, and also they should have little within farm variation. So they should be a good long-term measure of farms which have failures in hygiene or plant hygiene. However, even though they're thought of to demonstrate these farms with issues, I feel that we do see sporadic issues where we can have farms with very low Thermoduric counts consistently for a period of time, and then suddenly they can have a sporadic elevation for maybe only one test, and then it can go down the next month. And I think a lot of that might be to do with their environmental nature, and therefore we're dealing with seasonal changes a lot of time, and that can contribute to sporadic rises, which then subside in a subsequent test the subsequent month. So in terms of targets, or where we should look to target, if any of you are already doing Thermoduric testing with your milk processor, say for example, Muller from January 19 are introducing testing on the payment schedule, and they're introducing on a threshold of 1,000. So if you're 1,000 and above, there will be a penalty applied. And that generally is recognised as indicating chronic failures in cleaning. However, I would suggest that if we find we have levels greater than 500 colony forming units per mil, then it might be an indication to me that we need to start looking on farm and trying to deal with Thermodurics and looking at plant hygiene and plant management. Now, a normal is suggested internationally to be less than 175 colony forming units per mil, and people have described excellence as less than 10, though I think achieving that consistently on farms will be quite difficult, especially right now as we're only kind of starting the process of testing for Thermodurics and looking to manage it. So to touch on really backscan and Thermodurics, well, if we go back to backscan, it's the most common method used in GB UK. It measures all bacteria in milk. It measures both live and dead bacteria. That's a rapid test using an automated method, and it gives us a good overall estimation of milk quality. However, it can be limited in terms of its diagnostic value in determining the type or source of bacterial contamination. So if we look at Thermodurics, just as a comparison, this is actually a culture-based test. So we take a sample of milk, we then apply pasteurization temperatures to it to screen out non-thermoduric bacteria, and then we'll incubate that sample for a period of time up to 72 hours at about 30 degrees, and then read the result. So Thermoduric testing isn't as rapid as backscan. It can take up to 3 or 4 days for a result to follow. But why are we looking at Thermodurics in addition to backscan? Well, if we look at this snapshot of farms that were tested for both backscan and Thermodurics at the same time. So backscan is on the left, so the vertical axis. On the right, or the horizontal axis, we've got Thermodurics. So on this graph, we've got kind of 4 groupings. So the green represents farms at that point in time that had low backscan and low Thermodurics. The yellow represents farms that had high backscan but low Thermodurics. The pink represents farms that had high Thermodurics but low backscan. And the red represents farms which were high for both. So they were in a pretty bad situation. But from this snapshot, what I would suggest is there isn't a clear relationship between backscan and Thermodurics. And that is also backed up in some of the research that's out there. So my feeling is if we're only looking at backscan as a sole measure of bacteria in milk or milk quality, then we might miss some farms that have milk quality issues or high levels of bacteria in the milk, which could impact on processing. So we just want to touch briefly on patterns that we might see in Thermoduric levels in bulk milk. And if we go back, and look at the seasonality in Thermoduric patterns, and there's a study here by Billings and Cuthbert back in the 50s, they suggest that the highest levels tend to be seen in August, September. Connell's work in Ireland in 2013 highlighted that higher levels were seen in August, September. And if we look at NML's monthly averages through 2018, we can see that again, this period around August, September had an elevated Thermoduric level, but also we had a peak in around February, March. So I think again, we will gain more information as we test more regularly going into 2019, but I would perceive that we will again see a degree of seasonality in the pattern of Thermodurics across herds in the UK. And again, I believe that that's related to their environmental nature. So have they been used before? Well, the answer is yes. Thermodurics isn't a new issue. It's been recognised as a milk quality issue since the early 20th century, back at the start of the 1900s. This is what it was investigated because scientists and people involved in milk quality found that when they pasteurised milk, it still went off afterwards. So they investigated further and they identified these Thermoduric bacteria as a cause of spoilage. So it's not a new thing to look at Thermoduric bacteria. We've known about them for a long period of time. But also, Thermodurics aren't new as a payment parameter. They're already used as part of payment testing in countries such as New Zealand, Ireland, the Netherlands, and now GB. And reason why some countries might be ahead of the game or have started this sooner. Take, for example, Ireland. Their milk market's very different to here, and the majority of their milk will be processed, and they are a big player in the world market in terms of milk powder. And some of the export markets for things like milk powder have quite stringent requirements for standards, and Thermodurics is one of those standard measures. So that's why countries like New Zealand and Ireland haven't been looking at Thermodurics for a while. So why are they important? There's a range of different reasons, and I've already touched on some of them briefly. So Thermodurics, they aren't regulated in the same way somatic cell count and Bactiscan are. I'm sure everybody's aware we have certain regulatory limits for those, but there are certain kind of EC directives or regulations which relate to thermoduric levels in certain types of milk products. So take, for example, infant milk formula for feeding to infants less than 6 months of age. There's a regulatory threshold for thermoduric levels in this formula. And if we go and kind of look at studies worldwide, we can find thermoduric bacteria in these powders, and we know if these powders are reconstituted and stored incorrectly after reconstitution, the bacterial levels or thermoduric bacterial levels in milk powder can reach pathogenic levels. So there is concerns around food poisoning, but not only in infants but also in adults. There have been reported outbreaks of food poisoning in children in the UK from drinking contaminated milkshakes. Adults can also have food poisoning events, but I think these are often underreported because the majority of occasions these food poisoning incidents are quite mild and short-lived. But there have been fatalities reported in association with some thermoduric bacteria, but I think these events are very rare. So looking at thermodurics again and its significance, in a recent paper that I read estimated that a third of all spoilage and quality issues can occur in association with thermoduric bacteria, and only one spore per container, say, of milk can be enough, or one kind of bacterial unit can be enough to cause that spoilage. And there are clear associations between the level of thermoduric bacteria in raw milk and also the keeping quality of pasteurized milk on the shelf in the supermarket. And this is because thermoduric bacteria produce a range of enzymes which also have the ability to withstand pasteurization temperatures, and they can act on the substrates within milk, so things like fats and proteins, and cause these spoilage issues. And we can see a range of spoilage issues in different milk products. So take cream, for example. One of the common spoilage issues associated with cream and thermoduric bacteria is called Betty cream, where we get the cream splitting, we get clumps of fat in it, but also we get nasty flavors, so off flavors, rancidity, bitter flavors in a cream, so we can have an effect on cream production. We also see issues with fresh pasteurized milk. Again, we will see these off flavors, rancidity, fruity odors, stale flavors, bitterness. UHT milk also can have spoilage issues associated with thermoduric bacteria, because these thermoduric bacteria, some of them also have the ability to withstand ultra high temperature treatments, so temperatures in around the region of 130 to 140 degrees. They are very resistant to temperature, and we can see defects in UHT as well. And if you're a coffee lover like me, thermodurics can affect the quality of milk and may affect the frothability of your milk in your cappuccino or your latte or your flat white, so negative impacts there as well. And if we look at other products such as yogurt and butter, we do get taste quality issues with yogurt associated with thermoduric bacteria, and also it's suggested that butter production can be impacted because it can increase the churning time needed to produce butter. So again, another negative impact on a processed product. And finally, cheese is another product which has big issues associated with thermoduric bacteria. Some of the hard and semi-hard cheeses, such as Parmesan, some of the eye cheeses have issues with some of the Clostridial bacteria that are thermodurics, and these can produce gas, cause big irregular gas bubbles, as highlighted in the photos on my slide, which isn't kind of good for presentation to consumer, but also can cause this thing known as late blowing of cheeses, where the cheeses split during the maturation process, and that can obviously result in cheeses being downgraded to lower quality products or having to be binned, so it can add cost to the processing. But we do also see these flavour and aroma defects in cheese, which obviously impact consumer desire to buy certain products if these are a constant issue. So where do Thermoduric bacteria come from? Well, they're ubiquitous in the environment, so that means they can be present in a wide range of sources, from soil, bedding, feeds, forage, dust, water, and they also can be present in feces because they can be in the gut of mammals. So a range of sources can contribute Thermoduric bacteria to the environment on farm and therefore contribute to them being in bulk tank milk. So this next slide here is just taken from a review in Ireland of sources of Thermoduric contamination in milk. And again, it just produces kind of a schematic or a visual presentation of the way these bacteria can get into milk. So, onto the teats through soil contamination from the environment, like grazing, or through feeds, which contaminate, which then result in contaminated feces, contaminated bedding or environment, and then that can lead to dirt on teats. Dirty teats then can lead to contamination of raw milk. And then if we're not cleaning the milking equipment effectively, that contaminated milk can then also contaminate the milking equipment, which can then act as a reservoir of infection continuously for that raw milk. And it's also important to recognize that Thermoduric bacteria aren't shed directly into milk. They get into milk via the environment, contributing to poor cow cleanliness or poor teat hygiene, which then gets into the raw milk or onto the milking plant. So how do we look at managing them? Well, as I've kind of highlighted, Thermoduric bacteria come from a wide range of sources in the environment, so we need to look at environmental management. And therefore, part of that should be to look at cow cleanliness. Teat preparation is going to be key as well, because it can help mitigate challenges with environmental management and cow cleanliness. We should also focus on looking at hygiene during milking and effective parlour cleaning. And we should also forget about managing the bulk tank effectively also. So we just look at environment for a second. So I think the key thing to take away from this slide is really dirty cows mean dirty teats, which means dirty milk. Cow cleanliness is linked to farm hygiene, and the practices we apply on farm can be associated with milk quality. So focusing on this in a situation where you have elevated Thermodurics is going to be very important. So if you do have an elevated Thermoduric level, so one of the first things we could do is look at cow cleanliness, environmental hygiene, and we could do some hygiene scoring. So if you go onto the AHDB website, into the technical files of the resource library, you can download a PDF looking at hygiene scoring. And you can go through and, depending on the size of the herd, and you can get information on whether you need to score the whole herd or a proportion of the herd, depending on the herd size. You can take that information and look at what your scores are and decide whether you've got issues with suboptimal hygiene on farm. You've got too many cows with that are very dirty effectively. And then when you've recognise that, if you have got a hygiene issue with cows on farm, you can start to kind of drill down into where the contamination exists on the cow. Is it on the upper flanks, the upper leg, predominantly, which might suggest there's an issue with bedding management. So is bedding quality poor? Is it refreshed often enough? Are the cubicles cleaned regularly enough? Are there issues maybe with cubicle design? Have you got a lot of lower leg contamination, which might indicate some issue with fecal splashing from the alleyway? So that could be related to maybe automated scrapers not running frequently enough, issues with stocking density, lack of loafing area, or the other might represent all sources. It just gets you to think and look objectively at cow cleanliness and environmental hygiene. But also we can apply some other measures on farm which can help mitigate poor environmental hygiene or poor cow cleanliness. And these can include things like tail trimming and udder trimming or udder singeing. And these ultimately have been associated with a lowering of coliform counts and bacterial levels, or bacterial counts in milk. So we could make the assumption that performing these tasks routinely on farm could also be part of good practice in terms of managing thermoduric level in milk. It's kind of very obvious if you look at the pictures of the udder at the top of the slide. I know they haven't come out that well, but you can just see or imagine that if you remove all that hair from the udder before to the udder after, we're reducing the ability of bedding and therefore bacteria to stick to the udder and therefore potentially contaminate the milk during milking. So I just want to look at the milking process, because it's going to be a big focus for most farms when they've got elevated thermoduric levels. And really, as a starting point, we should think about some very basic or simple things. So, having a clean parlour as a starter would be good, like the one pictured in the slide. But also some simple things like, making sure if we're reattaching clusters, the clusters are actually clean. Not washing standings when they're occupied, not washing clusters when they're attached, and also thinking about staff hygiene also. So this milker here is very pleased, very happy during the milking process, but I wouldn't be so happy if I had an elevated thermoduric level on this farm, because she's all covered in shit down her front on her hands. So I think as well, if we are also not clean during milking, well then that could be a potential contributing factor to bacteria in the milk. One classic example is wearing gloves, but wearing the same gloves for the next month, or not cleaning gloves regularly during milking. That can be a contributor. So thinking about some simple things like that. And also after that, thinking about good teat preparation can be really important as well. There are a number of studies out there that highlight that effective teat preparation can be key in managing thermodurics. One such paper is highlighted here on the slide, and in this study, the guy that organised it looked at a range of different treatments, and he showed that he could achieve a 96% reduction in thermoduric levels in milk by applying 10 seconds of treatment with a moist towel and then drying with a paper towel, compared to no treatment at all. So effective teat preparation is going to be key in thermoduric management, and it shouldn't just be thought of as an effective tool to control thermodurics, but also back to scan and also new intramammary infections related to clinical mastitis, cell count, and can also have a role to play in maximising milk flow and efficiency of milking. So on to milking plant hygiene. Again, will be a big focus. So why is plant hygiene very important? Well, we have a lot of residues left in the plant after milking, and they're contributed or generated inside the plant due to the milk going through the lines, which obviously contains fat and protein, which can stick to the stainless steel lines. We also use water to wash the plant, which can then deposit mineral in the plant. So these build up and can form a kind of an effective medium for thermoduric bacteria to reside in and stick to. And therefore, if we're not cleaning the plant effectively, we're making it easy for them to stay in the plant and therefore seed into the milk and elevate our thermoduric levels. And also, there's a picture here on the slide of one of the thermoduric bacteria, one of its spores, Bacillus cereus, and you can see it has little appendages or legs. So this is one of the predominant thermoduric bacteria, and it has a real ability, better than most other bacteria, to adhere to even clean stainless steel, and that ability is exaggerated if we don't clean plants effectively, because they can stick really easy. And also when they stick, some of these thermoduric bacteria have the ability to form what's known as a biofilm, which can protect them from the temperature and chemicals and water we use to clean the plant. And again, just to touch these residues, so we have milk residues in the plant we're trying to remove, and these are fats and proteins. And then we have water residues, which are effectively generate mineral deposits. So water contains things like calcium, iron. These can stick to the plant and then create hygiene issues in our milk. And so we use a range of cleaners to try and deal with these residues. And typically we'll use kind of caustic or alkali or chlorinated alkali products, which tend to come on blue drums. And these are very effective at removing the fats and proteins that stick to the lines. And then traditionally, we would use acid-based cleaners, which tend to come in red containers. These used to be used infrequently, so we're introducing our milk store maybe on a monthly basis to try and control these water residues. Although, if you look at some processing pools now that have looked at dealing with Thermodurics over the last few years, they've moved to alternative alkali and acid washing on a daily basis, because they find that helps them deal with Thermoduric contamination in milk much more effectively. And it can often be recommended as standard for many of the modern milking powders that are going in now due to the complexity. So thinking about that for starters. And if we think about plant hygiene, it's not all about the kind of cleaning inside the plant, also cleaning outside the plant can be very, very important. This photo here is taken from Ian Onstad, and really the point of this photo is, if we don't clean external surfaces such as the jetters in the plant, and then we attach these to clusters, well then we're increasing our risk of contaminating the plant. So thinking about cleaning the outside of the plant effectively as well as the inside of the plant is going to be really important. So most people are going to perform some type of circulation cleaning, and that will generally include a pre-rinse, a wash, and a post-rinse, and it can either be manually applied or automatically applied. But really, for effective cleaning, we need a number of things. Just go back. And what we need to think about within that circulation cleaning is a number of areas. So things like focusing on, have we got the correct temperature of water? Have we got the correct water volumes at each stage? Are we utilising the right chemical? Is it at the correct concentration? And do we have adequate flow and distribution within the plant? I'll try and touch on some of these to go forward. So some cleaning problems we can come across are things like chemical is being used incorrectly or at the incorrect rate, maybe simply because a different product has been purchased and we failed to read the label of the product and assumed it's used at the same rate as the prior product we've used. Is it out of date? Some of these have relatively short half-lives, around 6 months, so be careful of that. Has the product become contaminated somehow? Is it the correct chemical for maybe the water quality or water hardness on our farm, or the type of cleaning we're trying to do? Or very simply, is the container empty, and is it actually anybody's job to check that regularly? Or do we put a date on the chemical drum, and when we know, if we can't get it forward, when that chemical should be used, so we can visually see on a daily basis when that drum should kind of be empty, and then we can try and look at changing that before it does run out. In terms of cleaning problems, as I talked about, the pre-rinse, the wash, and the post-rinse within a circulation wash. But just some simple things for to take home. The main circulation wash, really temperature at the start should be 85 degrees. Circulation with chemical shouldn't begin really until the water's coming back through the circulation at 55 degrees. We should end the main circulation wash cycle with a temperature of 55. The cold rinse tends to be cold. If it's not, and we're using certain sanitizers, we can limit their effectiveness. And the pre-rinse is generally described as cold, but often lukewarm. And maintaining adequate temperature during washing is very important because it can increase the effectiveness of the chemicals we use, and also the ability to lift residues off the plant and also kill bacteria. Time is very important, so don't forget about that. Typically a circulation wash is about 68 minutes long. You know, if we run it too long some of the time, if you're on a manual or even if you're auto, the plant can cool, the water can cool, and you can redeposit residues. Don't forget about water volume. It is also important, and there are specific recommendations for how many litres of water you need to use, particularly within the main circulation wash, depending on how many clusters there are in your plant. But one other thing, or a couple of other things to think about within water and cleaning problems is think about water hardness, because you've hard water, you've more mineral in that water, so therefore you have greater potential for deposits to be generated, and that might require you to look at different chemicals and also maybe other solutions such as water softening. I think water quality is a big issue. A lot of the time in the quality issues I'm asked to deal with. Please remember that if you go to the back of your red tractor assurance, that actually private water supplies need to be tested at least every 12 months. And a number of the back scan issues I've investigated recently, part of the issue has been private water supplies that have been contaminated. And this is one that I looked at, an elevated back scan, but it could also relate to elevated thermodurics, because thermoduric bacteria can contaminate private water supplies through leakage from septic tanks or silage effluent. And this farm had a back scan issue. We tested the water and we found there were some thermodurics there, some coliforms and some pseudomonads, which are a proxy for these psychotrophic bacteria that I mentioned earlier in my talk, the cold temperature loving ones. But this isn't potable water, and water must be potable to be used in cleaning a plant, and any presence of coliforms would indicate that the water isn't potable and therefore suitable to use. So if we have got elevated thermodurics, you can do some simple checks in the plant. And this is not an exhaustive list, but some things you could think of or look at. So simply looking at all your clusters and are they clean inside? Is water circulating within them all? Touch some of the lines during circulation and check them in different areas to make sure that they're all getting hot and that water is actually flowing around and getting to all parts. You could do a wash assessment with whoever your advisor on this type of thing is, and look at a water temperature both in the boiler, but also the boiler exit or entry to the parlour, and during the main circulation within that milk lines, and check if temperature is adequate. And this is just an example of a farm which had a thermoduric issue. The temperature in the boiler was about 85, so where I would target it at to start circulation, but the water was actually exiting the boiler at only about 73 degrees, so we were only getting about 63, 66 during the main circulation, which would be below what I would like to see. So they had a hot water issue on that farm, which was playing a role in elevated thermodurics. So you can simply check that. Anybody on manual washing will have wash tubs, so they can make it easy for themselves in terms of calculating water volume during circulation. Many of the auto systems now are difficult because the discharge pipe is often discharged into the floor to a drain, but you can often take the pipe off and just measure water volume in a bucket. So look at these things. Look at things like air injectors. As I mentioned earlier, we need to make sure we've got adequate flow within the plant. An air injector is there to make sure water and chemical and temperature contacts all surfaces within the parlour. We can't flood wash modern parlours because the bore or diameter of the lines is too wide, so we have to inject air to make sure we get contact with all those parts and get effective cleaning. And so checking things like air injectors, do they work? Do they go off often enough during the circulation wash? And does the slug of air that they enter into the plant come the whole way around the lines? And you can tell that by touching the receiver vessel and feeling it shake, and that'll tell you the slug of air comes the whole way around. So we should be getting effective cleaning. And just an example here of what cleaning problems might look like, and this is an extreme case of a farm that had actually an elevated back scan, not elevated Thermodurics, but just highlights what contamination might look like within a plant, and this is what their milk filters also looked like. So they had a lot of contamination in that plant, and that was partly due to issues with untested private water supplies, incorrect chemical concentrations, and also issues with water temperature during circulation washes. And don't forget about bulk tank. Cleaning is very similar to the main circulation wash, so we still have to think about water volumes, the chemicals we use, and the frequency of their use. I think one of the main issues here is that checking a bulk tank can be very difficult, and you might have to book a flexi collection to try and look into the bulk tank. But often, with elevated Thermodurics or elevated back scan, someone needs to visually inspect the tank and potentially get into the tank and check it, because often you can find contamination is present, but it's up the back, and you might not see it if you just kind of have a look in. So don't forget about bulk tank cleaning, it can be very important. And also refrigeration. As I mentioned earlier, these Thermoduric bacteria, some of them can survive and grow and multiply at low temperatures, less than 7 degrees. So if we're not getting effective cooling on farm, or not dropping milk temperature quickly enough after milking, we may run into issues with elevated Thermodurics, or it could be something that might explain an elevated Thermoduric level on farm. What should you target? Well, the ideal is that milk cools to 4 degrees within 30 minutes of milking finishing. If you're not doing that, have a think about issues on farm. Is your compressor damaged? Is your ice bank actually working and generating ice? Have you got issues with your plate cooler? Is it working effectively? Have you not got enough water flow to milk flow to ensure adequate cooling? Is milk being agitated? And finally, rubberware could be contributory as well. Bacillus and mycococci are two Thermoduric bacteria, and they could be normally found on the milk deposits in cracked rubberware. So obviously, as rubberware ages, it can split and pit. It can collect these milk deposits with these Thermoduric bacteria, and it becomes very difficult to clean effectively. So it could be a residue of contamination in the plant. So changing rubber liners, frequently, but also not forgetting about all the rubberware or rubber seals or joins. Often some of these haven't been changed for a number of years, and you can lift them out and they can have contamination on them. So don't forget those. And also some other things that can often be a problem is also air lines, sometimes never cleaned, and could potentially result in contamination. So that's my talk on Thermodurics. Hopefully everybody's taken something away, but as Kate said earlier, if there's any questions, please feel free to ask now or later.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. So we've got a few questions, and if we just give people a minute or two to put in some more as well if they wanted to ask any. So just to let everybody know that we have got some supporting resources on the topic, such as a guide to Thermoduric management poster, and we've also got some further guidance from the National Milk Laboratories as well from their website. So there's a link to both of these things that are on the original webinar invite that was sent, but I will send this out again as well to everybody that's been on this evening. And just to remind people that it has been recorded tonight, and it will be available to watch back on the AHDB Dairy YouTube channel, along with other webinars that we've done from the past few years. What might be handy, Andrew, and I don't know if you're okay, but would I be able to send a PDF of your slides to people
Yeah,
that have been on?
yeah, that's no problem.
That'd be just because there's some good figures on there, and a bit easier if it's PDF than watching a video sometimes. So that would be great.
Yeah, that's fine. No problem. I can email that over to you, Kate.
Okie doke, super. Right, so we'll go to a few questions then. We just had a comment to start off with from Michael, just talking about that barbers
Oh, yeah.
processors have recently launched the testing with the payment schedule starting from July. Do you
Yes.
foresee quite a few processors? You know, is this going to be the start of it being standard, do you think, in the UK, in GB?
I think so. You know, as I think it's Michael Masters. Let's just put that question up. So yeah, barbers have launched. You know, Muller have been testing for a while, and now I'm going to launch it as part of payment schedule in January. I know OMSCO do monthly Thermoduric coliform testing, but I can't remember if that's on payment schedule at the minute. And I know a number of other processors are looking at it. So I think it'll only be a matter of time before everyone considers it, or that's what I think. But you know, I couldn't say for definite. But there's clearly been a move towards focusing on it as maybe a way to gain some improvements in shelf life quality, and this was something I didn't touch on in the talk. Part of the desire to look at this is because consumers are asking for extended shelf life storage times, and some retailers will report that they can get a complaint almost every hour about the quality of their milk. So that's a big issue in terms of brand loyalty and consumer perception. So Thermodurics is a way of trying to potentially extend shelf life, because when we want to extend shelf life, it's predominantly Thermoduric bacteria that limit our potential to get out to say, you know, 10, 14, or even, you know, 3 weeks storage safely, you know, post production. So yeah, I think it will become more common.
Do you think it will give us an edge over other countries that you didn't put up? You mentioned about Ireland and New Zealand doing this, but say with other European countries, do you think that this would make us, you know, a bit better with the products with imports and exports? Or
I think a lot of I suppose it depends what people want to do with, you know, what the processors want to do with that milk. So it may gain them a competitive advantage, you know, if they, you know, if the market they're going into desires it, you know, ultimately, you know, they're going to do what's going to keep that person happy to secure that market and maybe secure other markets. I think a lot of the desire is also, you know, within kind of the UK and consumer desire for a you know, a higher quality product, or a product that lasts longer. You know, because I know myself, I don't want to be going to buy milk every other day or every third day. I want to buy milk, put it in the fridge, and still be able to drink it in 10 to 14 days time. And so this is part of the Thermoduric story, or why it's been focused on.
we've had a couple of questions in relation to bedding and how it affects it. So one from George asking about is there any connection or a higher level on green bedding? And then another question from Trina, which would link in, just asking if there's any links compared to like loose straw house, sand, sawdust, or out at grass. Is it more prevalent with any particular bedding?
If you look at a recent publication, farms that bedded on RMS or green bedding did have a significantly higher LPC, or what's known as a laboratory pasteurized count, which would be the same as a Thermoduric count. So there could be a suggestion that certain bedding types could maybe relate to elevated Thermodurics or Thermoduric issues in milk on farm. So yes, but also I suppose one of the I would say about bedding, if you know, when I looked at that study, it's quite you know, big recent one, and there aren't that many looking at bedding in that depth. What it does show is that, not necessarily in relation to maybe Thermodurics, but if you just look at bacterial loading within bedding, there's quite, within, say, sand, you can have high bacterial levels in sand post-use and low bacterial levels. You could do the same for sawdust, you could do the same for RMS. And I think, yes, certain ones have the greater potential, but from that study, I would take away that because there's a wide variation in bacterial levels within different bedding types, between bedding types, that a lot of bacterial loading within bedding is related to management. So that, is the product good enough quality to start with? So, for example, green bedding, does it start at the right dry matter? Is enough used? Is it refreshed frequently enough? And are there other issues on that farm that use it? So, is there issues with ventilation or environment, which could potentially worsen the situation? So, yes and no. I suppose I'm kind of sitting on the fence with that one, and it's also a bit tricky. There are a number of studies highlighting a relationship between bedding bacterial load and bacterial level in milk, but there are also studies not finding a relationship, so the relationship isn't always consistent between bacterial levels in bedding and bacterial levels in milk, and that's probably because it might relate to how good the bedding is at sticking to the udder. So that might relate back to looking at things like udder singeing or trimming, but also it might relate to how effective our teat preparation is. And that's why I kind of said earlier, teat preparation can be a real key area in managing Thermodurics, because it can be that intervention that might break that link between heavy bacterial load in bedding and bacterial level in milk. Hopefully I've answered those questions. It's not, yeah.
Okay.
If not, if anybody wants to get in contact with me and afterwards, and we can go through this a bit more.
That's great. I can put your email down, can I, Andrew, on the
Yeah,
Okay. A couple of questions in from Dave. One's a bit of a techie one, just asking about what kind of species the bacteria are. And then also there was a question that is asked in relation to the peak on the graph that you showed earlier between March and August. Could that be linked to changes in feeding regimes or housing and so forth? If you could just give a bit more detail on those two things, maybe.
Yeah, so my understanding, and I'm not a microbiologist, and some people may know more than me, but so in terms of types of species in general of which bacteria, well, Thermoduric bacteria, I think the big predominant ones that seem to always pop out to me are things like bacillus, so Bacillus cereus, but there are lots of other different types of bacilli that can be an issue in processed products. But Bacillus cereus might be the main one. There are some Clostridia, as Dave's highlighted, so Clostridia tyrobatiricum and butyricum, and some other Clostridia, and they would tend to be associated with silage and poorly ensiled silage or poorly managed silage that feed out. So yeah, bacilli, Clostridia can be important. And I think there's a question about are they all spore formers? So they're not all spore formers. Bacillus and Clostridia are spore formers, and they would be the ones I know of that are important. But there are other non-spore formers such as enterococci and micrococci and things like lactobacilli that can also, they are thermogenic bacteria and potentially could cause issues. Also, but when I read stuff, it tends to be people mention things like bacillus and Clostridia more often, and it's the Clostridia that tend to cause issues in cheese production. There's the gas production I highlighted earlier, but they can still, potentially cause other types of spoilage. So I think that has answered Dave's question.
Okay, and the peak in the graph, is that anything to do with feeding or housing regimes?
Sorry, yeah, apologies. If you look at it, I think it could be related to just environmental fluctuations, so changes in weather. It could be related to changes in feeding practices potentially. So maybe if you've moved from one clamp of silage to another, maybe one's could be quite heavily contaminated potentially if it is poor quality or poorly managed to feed out. Wet feeds potentially could also be a source of thermoduric bacteria on farm, because obviously they're damp, poorly stored on farm, and have the ability to heat up, so they form an ideal environment for bacterial growth. And yeah, other management practices on farm can potentially affect thermodurics. So if you look at some research from Ireland, they showed there was a significant association between providing fresh grazing every 12 hours in grazing herds and the thermoduric level or bacillus level in milk. So I think it's more complex, and it'll be farm specific in terms of what those what's contributed to that. And I don't totally know the answer, but that would be what I would think. It'd be probably different things in different farms, but I think maybe the environment and seasonal changes could be a big player in it. So just really temperature and kind of moisture at certain points of the year.
Okay. A couple of questions from George and Alison in relation to robots. Is it more prevalent with robotic herds, and for any particular reason?
If I'm honest, I don't know. I haven't done enough thermoduric investigations or any actually with robotic herds. I've done some backscan investigations. So I suppose, if we look at milk quality, I think there are sometimes potential issues in AMS systems, just because it can often be difficult, I think, to prepare teats as well as a good member of staff in a milking parlour. But I think it's probably weak saying that, and there's a lot of other things, I think, as I've said in my talk, that could play into it. And I wouldn't necessarily like to say that automated systems could have more thermoduric issues than standard non-automated systems. And I've not read enough evidence. I've not read enough to know that, or I don't know if anybody knows. Feel free to tell me. It'd be nice to know, but I don't really. There's definitely in the UK there isn't really the information for me to say that. But Alison Clark has just said that she's found that robotic farms seem to have more of an issue with therms in comparison to conventional. Well, I've kind of maybe answered that. Is this due to teat prep? Well, I think potentially, but it could be other issues. I wouldn't want to suggest it's solely down to that.
Yeah.
So I think I've answered that, hopefully, Kate.
Yeah, no, that's no problem. Okay, so one from Maggie next, and she's asking, just as it's possible to have an outline of Bactiscan, is it possible to have an outline of Thermoduric results? And if so, how does this happen?
So what, an outline result, I'm assuming, so one random result that's really high that doesn't fit the trend?
Oh, out of line, sorry,
Yeah.
not an outline. Yeah, my fault.
I think, how does that happen? My suggestion would be that, again, maybe the sporadic fluctuations that out of line tests could be could be related to the environment potentially. A bit of contamination just gets in once, and that causes a high result. Where that's from, maybe a load of feces gets into the plant once and into the milk. Could be a sampling issue, could be a handling issue. Maybe it's mislabeled or human error. So it could be a number of reasons. And I think, if you say, for example, you look at Muller's approach to introducing testing on the payment schedule, they're going to do it on a 4-month average, so over 4 tests with the highest result disregarded. So I think they are acknowledging that there is the potential for these outlying results, and they're trying to deal with that to make the kind of payment and testing fair for their suppliers. So yeah, hopefully we've touched on that.
Okay, so we've got a couple more questions. It's 8 o'clock now, so we'll just wrap up with the questions that we've got. There's a couple in relation to sort of machinery and plant cleaning. The first one from David asking about peracidic acid, about pre-rinsing, and also another one from Stephen. So can you see those two, Andrew, to comment on
Yeah,
those?
I am going up now. So,
David,
oh
on
yeah,
the
sorry. So yeah, how about pre-rinsing the plant with peracetic acid? Um, yeah, some systems do have pre-rinses. A certain time pre, milking, or just at the beginning of milking. So a pre-rinse with a sanitizer, be it hypochlorite, be it peracetic acid, could be appropriate. But I suppose I would always add a caveat with something like, peracetic acid is that, check when you use it, you're using it at the right concentration, because it could have negative effects on some of the components or parts of the plant. And I would also check with your kind of advisor in this area. So, be it your parlour technician, or if you have a milk hygiene kind of advisor, check is it really appropriate or necessary in your farm? But yeah, potentially using sanitizers can be important, and it can be used pre, milking. I think that one was asking, or they could be used in the post rinse after milking, and they sometimes can be especially important when maybe private water supplies are used and there are question marks over water quality. So yes, but be careful. These things, they can have negative effects, and also use them at the recommended rates, because we don't want any issues with residues.
And Stephen's asked about hypochlorite as a final rinse. Would that help with Thermodurics?
I think it'll ultimately help with disinfection of the plant, so it's got to be effective, definitely, or helpful, definitely in managing milk quality. But can't always guarantee that just one thing like that will be the solution. It's often a little bit more, but yeah, you could look at using hypochlorite or any type of sanitizer in the post rinse.
He's asked for what level. Would that be just looking at the instructions there, or would you?
I tend to avoid telling people levels to
Yeah.
use, because I think it's a bit like me and my advice on using antibiotics on farm. It's like read the packet, check the manufacturer's instructions. So I'm going to avoid giving a specific recommendation about that, because it won't always be the same.
Okay. Okay, great. A couple of points from Michael. He's talking about, he's asking about, can poor teat skin condition harbour the bacteria? Because he's got a client that periodically changes teat dip to cause exfoliation to get rid of high thermo figures. So is that something that you've come across before?
No. I suppose per teat condition, I suppose it could help harbour Thermoduric bacteria or other bacteria, but it would also concern me if you had issues with poor skin condition anyway, because obviously that might result in further damage to the teat, or maybe the teat splitting, or you having sores, which then creates difficulties in terms of milking. And so for me, poor teat conditions just generally isn't ideal for the cow, and might suggest there are issues with environmental management, and or maybe the teat tips and the softeners in them, so things like lanolin or glycerin, to try and help manage teat skin condition. I've not really ever came across that to cause exfoliation to get rid of its high thermoduric figures. It may work in that farm, but it's not something that I would have thought of. Again, I suppose teat preparation is part of the puzzle, but I suppose if we're concerned about thermoduric levels on the skin in the first place, well then, I think I might go backwards from that and look at why we might be concerned with that. Are there issues with environmental management or bedding management or bedding quality or cubicle design? you know, and not just solely focus on that as sole reason. But again, I'm not saying I know everything about teat preparation, so that might be something I've missed out on.
Okay. All right, that's great. Right, before the last question, there was just a comment from Lucy saying that NML do provide retests on
Yeah,
out of line results from that from Maggie earlier, so that's quite handy.
yeah, yeah. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, they'll do. Yeah, you can. Yeah, with you know, Lucy, you know, and Miller, they will do. If you get a high test, you'll have another test immediately a week post the first high test, and then you can also request additional tests also yourself independently of the routine test. There, I think test costs around £7 through NML, but I don't know, you know, how much they cost anybody else, so they're a bit more expensive than a back scan test.
Okay. All right, great. And last question from Trina. Now, I'm not sure if I fully understand this. You might have to go into the detail, but she's asked, is the use of peracetic acid in final rinse of the wash in the pre-dip and possible pre-rinse of plant used successfully as part of the control, especially in the Netherlands? I'm sorry, I'm not sure. You might have to just explain that if you understand it a bit more than me.
I don't know specifically about the Netherlands, but yeah, you know, using sanitizers like peracetic in the, you know, in a post rinse, or using a sanitizer as a form of a pre rinse prior to, you know, milking in the same, which kind of in the same as the same as really using a post rinse, post cleaning. They can all be effectively used as a method to you know, control milk quality and manage thermoduric levels. I'm not, if I haven't answered that, you know, I'm happy to be emailed and asked a bit further, or if I can't answer the question, try and get someone else to answer it.
Okie doke. All right, that's brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. Very comprehensive session. So I hope everybody's found it valuable, and appreciate your time this evening. So we'll round it up there. And so I'll forward on the information to everybody by email that's been involved this evening, that's been listening this evening. So I'll send on a few links, a PDF of the slides, and it will take a couple of days for the video to be uploaded to our YouTube channel if you wanting to watch it again or share it with anybody who wasn't able to make it this evening. And we've also got plenty of other webinars and YouTube videos on lots of different topics as well, so quite handy if you're at home and just wanting to have a look at something from the comfort of your own home, really, which is always nice. So thank you, Andrew, for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Really appreciate that. It's been a good session.
Thank you, no problem.
Okie doke. All right then, everybody. Thanks very much, and good night.
Cheers, night.